Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the Business Connection, a leading Brazil business podcast talking about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American living in Brazil, known for business networking and talking from my podcast studio in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. Today's guest is Rafael Fulton Fernandes, and he's talking with us from Raleigh, North Carolina in the United States. Rafael Fernandes is Brazilian, lived and worked in multiple countries, has developed global and multicultural relationships, and achieving professional and academic success. He is a leader, overachiever, dreamer, determined, goal-oriented, and career-driven individual. His passions include diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. I first met Rafael as a high school student in Brazil when he participated in an event at Amcham Brasil here in Campinas. So with that, Rafael, welcome to Talk to Brazil Business Connection.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you so much for the invitation, and very good morning.
And Rafael, you finished high school in Brazil. You studied and worked in Germany, then studied and worked some more in the United States, having finished a BS degree at Penn State University. And now you're in Raleigh. From your point of view, how do you see diversity, equality, and inclusion comparing Brazil, Europe, and the United States in the schools that you've been through and what you see in the corporate world? And the question starts with, why are you passionate about all that?
Tom, it's a very interesting question. I think one of the things that when I left Brazil and moved to Europe and even to the United States, I started realizing that in Brazil, I was part of, the white majority. In Brazil, the difference when we see color and race and ethnicity is very mixed because the inherent heritage of Brazilians come from everywhere. They come from Europe, they come from Asia, they come from Africa. And it's very interesting that in Brazil, we have this diagram that when you look, Brazilians can be anything, right? When you look in the street, Brazilians can look like anything. And when you move to Europe and the US, is more of a structure and framed how you look like, what your ethnicity is, what your race is. And I remember when I moved to the United States where I had to mark on the box where I was from. And it's very singular where you can be white, you can be African-American, you can be Hispanic and Latino. And Brazilians are considered Hispanic and Latino. Brazilians are considered, because we are in Latin America, we are considered a minority. Regardless what race you're in, you are a minority here in the U.S. And when I moved here and I didn't know exactly what to put, white or Hispanic and Latino, for me it was just, I always put myself as white, but I wasn't white. When I went to apply for school and even at Penn State, I would mark as white because in Brazil I mark as white, and in the U.S. I was Hispanic Latino. So my passion started coming and understanding that I can be in one country a majority, in another country a minority. And how can I bring the different opportunities and all of these things that you mentioned of me moving to Europe and then moving to the US, how can I bring this to the minorities in the US? I've had the opportunity because I grew up in Brazil as part of a majority and as part of a middle class. Here in the US, it's very difficult to see minorities being part of the middle class. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to see them having the same opportunities that I had. So when I moved here, I started realizing the cultural differences. And even at Penn State, I founded a Latino club at Penn State in 2016, because there were a lot of Latinos, but they weren't talking to each other.
Right.
So the Latinx community and the Hispanic community within the school, they weren't talking to each other. And we wanted to have that amazing culture that we have back in Brazil and back in the Latino countries, which is partying and dancing and sharing cultural experiences and cooking and having that, way of living that is so different than usually when you move away from home and you're more by yourself. So you're creating the community. And it's interesting that after that, it just led to all of the companies that I worked for. After that, I had a very big interest in how can we amplify the diversity and the inclusion within the companies, and especially at Lenovo, where I work for, how can we amplify the voices of the minorities and all of the minorities within the company, that they're given the same opportunity that other people are given.
Well, you're making some interesting points, and you remind me of when I first came to Brazil many, 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 many years ago. And one of the things that struck me at that time, obviously I came here, I didn't speak Portuguese, and I was obviously exposed to what you just mentioned, a culture that's multi-ethnicities and different, and not really different colors, because what impressed me at the beginning, that in Brazil you refer to colors in shades. So you have black and white, but you have everything in the middle. You also have a very large and important Asian culture here. This is the largest Japanese population outside of Japan. You have a lot of mixture here. And it actually shows in what you said. You know, if you look at people here, they can be anything. They can be from anywhere. And it's really difficult. But here, when I remembered when you would talk about color, you would have obviously boxes, and you had different words for different colors and different shades. So people were referred here in shades of color, which to me was interesting to learn. But what you just said about in the States or schools or what have you, in other places, you really have to fill in a box. And many of these times you don't have the option of putting all of the above, right? So you could really be all of the above, but if the form doesn't permit you to do that, then really you have to classify yourself as something. And that's something that most people, I don't know, when I came here, I never thought of myself of what am I? But when you start seeing these boxes, it's sort of a mental state that you're not used to. And I can see that from the perspective today, you're talking about diversity, where many people have to classify themselves. Here in Brazil today, for universities, you have boxes that have to be filled in, and people have to say what they are. And some places they have to prove that shade of color, either to get in or to have certain benefits in schools. Even companies now, and you've probably followed that very recently, a company called Magazine Luiza, Magalu, recently came out offering internships just for, we'll say, black people, really understanding that there has to be something stronger in terms of diversity. And it's a company stepping forward, really addressing it, and obviously opening itself up to all different shades of criticism for doing that. People that think it's a good idea, people think it's a bad idea. And I think that's the world that we lived in. Now, you've been in different parts of that world. You mentioned the States, you mentioned here. What about Europe?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I remember when I was in Europe, it wasn't very, how I would say, it wasn't very specific or targeted like the US or Brazil are. Europe is more, because of the European Union, people can be from anywhere within that European Union. And even with the situation from Asia and the Middle East with the refugees as well, it was more a difference between where you're from in regards to country rather than in regards to color. So, or in regards to race or ethnicity. It was just more, for example, if you're working for a German company or if you are at the university, you're going to see people from countries all over the globe, but mostly within the European Union. And because of the free circulation and free trade, it's very easy for Italians to be living in Germany, very easy for French to be living in Germany. And I have the experience of Germany, so that's why I can talk about that. But it wasn't much of the focus that we see in the US and in Brazil, as we're seeing with Magalu, and we're seeing other companies as well. And after the killing of George Floyd, the protests all over the world. But in Europe is more the difference between being from the European Union and being from Middle East or being from refugee countries. So the difference that I saw in Germany, it was not color ethnicity, it was country based.
But you still had boxes that you had to check off.
You still had boxes, but they were more, I would say, they were wider. Because if you're part of the European Union, you can go to any country and you can live in any country. You don't need visas. You don't need extra passports. But if you are from the Middle East, or if you are from a country that is going through or went through a couple of years ago a war, and a lot of refugees moved to Germany and moved to France and moved to other countries as well, that's where you see that division. That's where you see the division of, hey, he is European or he's German, and hey, he is not from this country. Mm-hmm. So that was the biggest division in Europe, and not much in regards to what the diversity looks like, because Europe is very diverse. When you look about Europe, we know its majority is white, but it's very diverse in regards to countries.
Right.
But when you look at color, you don't see as much as in the U.S. You don't even see as close as it is in Brazil, because it doesn't have that mix. But when you start seeing countries and where they come from and where they originate and where they end up being, that's where you start seeing the differences, and that's where you start seeing who gets the opportunities. Mm-hmm. If you are from certain countries, you're going to get certain types of opportunities. If you are from other countries, you may get other types of opportunities.
Well, how did you melt into all this? So you went to Europe. Obviously, you were here. You lived around the Campinas area. You went to school. I mentioned we met at Amcham, and first of all, I want to commend you for that, because I think it's an excellent example of starting out very young, of learning about networking, of learning about relating to people. And it's not only business. Life is about people. And really, you have to get out of your box, whatever that box is, and meet people. And you did that very well. I remember you as a youngster, sort of bright-eyed and wondering what the hell's happening. But you really tread through that, and you actually became an intern for a short period at Amcham. How did that open? Did that help you check any boxes in your personal life?
Yes, I think overall, first, networking is key. One of the things that you go through your career is all about the people you end up meeting. I think all of the jobs and universities that I attended, they were mostly because of networking. You talk to one person that had a friend that went to Penn State, that had a friend that went to Michigan State, that had a friend that works at Lenovo or IBM, and all of this, you end up meeting people, and doors start opening. Doors start opening not only on LinkedIn, but they start opening on events that you go to. So a couple years ago, and now almost 10 years ago, when you and I met on Amcham, we started this opportunity that Amcham at that time was doing an internship with my high school. And it was a good opportunity as a 16, 17-year-old to have a little bit or a glimpse of what the professional work looks like, mm-hmm. what the professional life looks like. And if you start that young and you put in your resume at a 16-year-old that you already woke up at 8 in the morning, worked until 5, 5 in the morning, you got to leave your house and, get dressed. And at that time, wear a suit and tie. Now it's a little bit different, that you can wear a polo or you can wear something different, but, wear a suit and tie, drive and work until 5. And you have that experience at a very early age, if that's something that you're interested in.
Well, get somewhere on time is the first experience, right?
Exactly. It's just different. It's just the earlier you start, the easier it gets once you actually get to real life. Internship during high school is just more an apprenticeship, but it's understanding what work life looks like and meeting people and having fun and learning. But after that, once you get to college, you start getting more serious internships. And, that's what's going to drive to you getting your first job after college. So networking is key from a very early age. Take the resources. I was able and very fortunate that my dad used to not force me, but take me willingly and offer me to take to these networking events that Amcham and other companies, especially in the Campinas area in São Paulo, they offer. And if you have that opportunity, definitely take up on parents, friends, or even colleagues from school or work that are willing to take you to these networking events. They make the difference.
No, I think so. And I've always defended that it makes a difference, but you need to start young, because today, talking about difference in 10 years, there's actually more competition in the professional world than there was 10 years ago. And I don't want to say there wasn't any competition then. And now if you're not, and then companies have become more global, the market's opened up everywhere. It's multicultural, as you said. And the sooner people are aware of that, the sooner young people are aware of that, the better their future will be. Unfortunately, I know a lot of older people that haven't realized that yet. And they're still very local, they're still very regional, and still talk about, a global market like something else, like it's out there. But it's not out there, it's here, it's everywhere. And what you said from your line of diversity and inclusion, you need to understand all these different nuances that come. And that just comes from being part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Once you start realizing and understanding other people's perspectives, you put yourself in their shoes. And for you to do that, you need to be open to meeting new people. So you only start understanding, especially on the diversity and inclusion area and arena, you only start understanding what goes on with that arena once you start putting yourself on each other's shoes or other people's shoes. And for you to do that, you need to meet people. So you need to be out there and you need to start networking and understanding history-wise, what are some of the things that in the U.S. are different than in Brazil, and how can you do globally areas of interest and effects that are going to impact the company and the opportunities that you're providing to the people that you're targeting for. So, Tom, as you said, the earlier people start networking and the earlier they start getting out there, and LinkedIn, it's such a great tool that 10 years ago they were just starting. It's such a great tool now for you to get mentors and mentees that are in the area of expertise. And it's something that you or people as high schoolers, they can also say, what are the things that I don't want to do? They put themselves up on LinkedIn and they reach out to people and they say, hey, let me talk to you 30 minutes about your area or your market. And they talk for 30 minutes and it's like, hey, I don't like this at all. I don't want to work a 9-to-5 job. But at least you rule it out. You rule it out something that you wouldn't have the opportunity, and you end up finding that out when you were already done at school that you don't like that. So it's just a good opportunity.
But you learned too. I think one of the important things that you learned, obviously you learned that here, the importance of knowing and meeting people for the first time. But once you decided to go to Europe, or once a younger person decides to go to another country either to work or to learn, from day one, when you step off that plane, it's just meeting new people every day. You don't know anybody normally.
Yes.
You may know one or two or three persons or have indications or whatever, but every person you meet for a long time is new. So it becomes a process, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does become a process, especially when you move to different countries. And as you said, you leave the plane, you probably know one or two people, but after that, it's all about you putting yourself out there, meeting different people, creating your circle within the country for as long as you're there. And after you move multiple times, you end up learning that it's all about people. And you only...
But it's all a process, right?
It is all a process. And it's all understanding where you fit in that process, understanding how you meet people, what are the best ways, and it's just more being open to be out there and understanding what process is meeting people and what are the things that you can give that person, offer to that person and take back. So it's just networking.
Sounds like business.
It does sound like it does sound like business. I think that's all business is all about. It's all about relationships. People only buy from you and people only want to work with you if they either like you or they want to be around you. So it's all about business.
Or they find out about you, because today there's so many. And one of the things you mentioned before we started was Raleigh. I wasn't aware that Raleigh in the United States was even a focal point for technology. So sometimes you find about information about people or about places or about companies really in an indirect way. Because most people think everybody knows everything, right? When I first came to Brazil, everybody thought I knew everything about Brazil. But when I first got here, I said, I don't know anything about Brazil. There's really nothing out there about Brazil. The only thing that I had seen was very little bit of information from people that I had met at my university that showed me magazines with a lot of beautiful pictures. But when I got here, it was a different story. Everybody said, no, everybody in Brazil speaks English. Nobody in Brazil speaks English, right? So these are the things that you learn the hard way. But these relationships that you can have is really the better part of the educational process. You learn more through people than you learn through books or encyclopedias, whatever it was in the past, or even in Google today.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting, too, that when you think about languages and when you think about speaking other languages, if you went to Brazil, so let's just say you're here in the U.S. before you move and you want to learn Portuguese, you're never going to learn as much as you'd learn by meeting people. So I talk about my English, I talk about my German, that I would never have improved on those languages or be able to speak in a way that it would be uninterrupted for a long period of time if I wasn't meeting people. If I was just studying from a book or just doing classes, I wouldn't be able to speak as I speak today. And it was all about meeting people. All the languages you end up speaking is all about, how many people have I met? And then they taught me a slang different, or they taught me a way that, especially in the U.S., slangs and accents are so different all over. And for you in Brazil as well, all the slangs and the words are different all over, that you end up learning by meeting people. You end up learning by having those conversations and having those interactions.
Yeah, it's street language. You can only learn street language on the street.
Exactly.
And that's the important. Well, you've exposed yourself to all of those different street languages. And how many languages do you speak today?
So fluently, I speak 4 today. I speak Portuguese, English, German, and Spanish. And I use all of them but German at work. So I use Portuguese, English, and Spanish at work today. But
you have used German in the past?
Yes. I worked for a German company here in the U.S., a chemical German company, for a year. And before that, I worked in Germany where I used my German. But for the past 3 years, I haven't used much of my German at work, just outside of work.
So you have to get back on the street again, huh?
Yeah. At some point, I have to either go back there and spend some time, or start doing more projects related to Germany. But it's interesting that English is mostly what we use unless you are doing the relationships. Tom, as you were saying, I only use my Portuguese and my Spanish because we do have a factory out in Mexico that I am able to use my Spanish, but not on meetings that I am with people from all over the globe. It's usually more, hey, I need help from a specific person, or they need help from me and they know that I'm a point of contact that speaks the same language as they do.
Right.
So it's easier for people to reach out to you and say, hey, Rafa, I'm having a problem with my language in their own language, rather than, hey, I need to translate this to the English, and then I'm going to tell him that I'm having a problem. So having this also language and this common interest or commonality between the countries is something that helps a lot.
No, and I want to say, well, obviously I'm part of that. When I started this program, Talk to Brazil, it was actually on that to generate information about business in Brazil in the English language. Because why would I want to develop something in Portuguese at that time when nobody spoke Portuguese? And the world was advent for information about Brazil, but in English. And that was my driver to start that and to keep it going. And the basis, and I've expanded my networking, my relationship, throughout the planet, but that's all in English. And then you get recommendations, because obviously I know people from many countries, and I speak English and Portuguese and enough Spanish to get around Latin America. But English is the business language. So for Brazilians, for students in school that would be looking towards you, English is the start. So it's not that I want to say the Portuguese isn't important, but today in the business world, in the educational academic field, for you to get into a school anywhere today, you need to speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So how much worth was that of being able to speak?
I don't think I can even measure. It's one of, if not the best thing I've ever done. And I think my parents and all the efforts of schools in Brazil as well of giving this opportunity. I know it's not for everyone, but at some point, hopefully we're going to be able to give this opportunity for everyone. But studying English, studying Spanish, first, you develop a different side of your brain, and you're always working a different side of your brain. Second, you end up meeting so many people. I remember at work, there is one woman at work that I didn't know she was from Germany, because we're always talking in English. And then at some point we ended up in a meeting, and she asked me, hey, what's your name? What are you from? What do you do? And then all of a sudden I mentioned to her, oh yeah, because before I came here, I lived in Germany. She went, what do you mean? I'm from Germany. We started speaking German. And then all of a sudden we were best friends and she was amazing. And at that time she was a director. So she had 6 months later a project where, because we became such good friends, because we both speak German, that she invited me to be in a project that was very high exposure to executives, just because we ended up talking about German. We ended up talking about Germany, where she was from, where I lived. So, Tom, I don't think I can measure, and I don't think I can tell you how important it is and how grateful I am for having the opportunity to speak not only 2 languages, 3 languages. Of course, English is the business language, and English helped me come where I am. But learning other languages as well, man, they really, at work, they make the difference. At life, they make the difference. And you end up meeting so many people just because, even if you have nothing in common with those people, at least you speak the same language.
Right. But I want to take back to another point you mentioned, LinkedIn. And what you said and what I was able to do very quickly, because I had said we had met like when you were 15 or 16. But very quickly I could look at your LinkedIn profile, and within a question of 2 minutes, I can see and understand 10 years of history. And we haven't talked before this, right? And what we're going to talk about, I can pick that out from what's exactly there. So I think that's the other side. Language is important, but showing the world who you are, what you are, and your principles, what you showed, that needs to be out there. That's your personal billboard. So when we're talking about personal branding, obviously languages are involved, your background, where you've been, what you've studied, how you've done that. But the future's long. I always say the future's longer than you think it is. So, but you have to keep showing what you're doing, where you're doing it, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it. I think those are the important things. And that's what I feel that many people don't understand, even about LinkedIn. It's very short and sweet of what this is where I work, this is what I do. But it's a place to show your history, a place to show who you are.
Yeah, and overall is a great tool as well for you to be true to yourself and show people, hey, this is who I am, this is my resume, these are the things I'm working on. You end up meeting people from all over. So if you're interested in other countries as well, Tom, you can reach out, as we haven't talked in 10 years and all of a sudden we're talking about diversity and inclusion. Who would have thought that 10 years ago as a high schooler we would be talking about diversity and inclusion in the US, Europe, and Brazil. So it's just something that it's interesting. You reconnect with people, you connect with new people, and it just has so many capabilities today that allow you to study, to go in deep learning, to find jobs, and just always being true to yourself and showing people what you're doing in the five W's, right? So the 4 W's and the 1 H. How you're doing, why you're doing, what you're doing, when you're doing, and where you're doing. And it's just interesting that LinkedIn allows you to do all of that and share that with people.
But the point is, we wouldn't have been having this discussion if you hadn't reached out. So all of what you said was true, but if you don't initiate a process, it doesn't start. So I think that's the important message for everybody. Never be afraid to ring somebody's bell.
Yeah, I usually tell people you already have the no until you ask.
That's right.
If you don't ask, you're going to have 100% of a no. If you ask, you have the 50-50 chance. So usually just go for it, be formal, be eloquent in your message, and they may say no, but at least you will know after they say no, because there's always a 50% chance that they're going to say yes.
And then you can ask why, right? So anyway, Rafael, I want to thank you for ringing my bell. We're running to the end of our time, unfortunately, but I want to thank you also for sharing your time with our listeners, and mentioned everybody can find out more about you on LinkedIn, where they'll find you as Rafael Fulton. That's Rafael Fulton, and the last name is Fernandes, Fernandes, right?
That is correct, Tom. And if you have any questions about US, Germany, Brazil, technology, diversity, and inclusion, I'm happy to help and spend some time with any of the listeners.
So thanks again for sharing, and have a good day there.
Have a great day, Tom. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. And I'd like to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, www.focusmi.com. Visit our website, talktobrazil.com. Find our previous shows of Talk to Brazil, which are also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, YouTube, and many more. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.